The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. It is one of the most coveted trophies in the world, but are gold medals really gold? Well, mostly, they're not. The gold medals given out these days are nearly entirely silver and are plated with pure gold to give them that iconic sheen. Silver medals are, of course, made with silver, and bronze medals are a combination of copper and other metals like tin or zinc. And while winning an Olympic medal is priceless, the value of the materials in the medal are not. In recent games, some of the materials used to make the medals have come from recycled cell phones. Mass Mutual celebrates women's sports history and understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
MotoGP has unveiled its new rules for 2027, with one of the current bike's most controversial elements outlawed and another one pegged back. But has it all gone far enough, and are these the right moves for the World Championship? Joining me, Matt Beer, to give the Race MotoGP Podcast's initial take is Simon Patterson, who's in his usual European season position of parking a van somewhere beside the road, in this case in France. And we're coming to you a day later than usual, listeners, as you've probably noticed, because we want to make sure we could include some 2027 rules chat in this podcast, and we had to wait for Simon to get off a boat, which has been on for about a day, so he could talk to us and record properly. That's now the case, so Simon's joining me here. There are a few elements to get into with this, Simon, but the headline one for me is the long-expected engine capacity change, down from 1000cc to 850. We've been here before in a way, when we went from 990s to 800cc's and created the least popular bikes of the MotoGP era. Is it going to be better than that this time? Please say yes.
It seems like it is. From what we understand, they've been smarter about the way that they've written these rules this time, and they've made a few more changes alongside just dropping the capacity that should make it a bit more sane. I'm not a technical expert, so this is all from speaking to other people over the last few days. But essentially, when we went to 800s from the original 990s, the manufacturers just turned them into absolute revvy monsters. So the intention, which was initially to make them safer by making them slower, they just became more dangerous because they had huge amounts of corner speed and wanted the high side riders to the moon every time they exited a turn. So it didn't work. We went to the thousands, which were a bit lower rev and a bit more sane, and we've had a good time with them. They've worked quite well in that regards. But obviously, we've got to the point now where they're just producing too much power. So moving to 850s, where we're going to see about 40 horsepower less. I'm speaking to people. That's kind of the assumption, the ballpark figure. But what we're also going to see is reduced number of gearbox ratios, which is going to sort of convince manufacturers that it's in their best interests to keep these bikes torquey rather than revvy. And they're also keeping the stroke of the engine cylinders the same, which means that you can basically just reduce the bore and the size of your piston, make the 1000cc engine into an 850 engine very, very simply. And I'd imagine there's a few manufacturers have already done that to get an idea for what they're going to be like. But because you're keeping the stroke at a fixed length, it also means that they're not going to be super revvy. So in theory, they should just be slower without all of the higher revving, higher corner speed issues of the previous 800s. We knew that the manufacturers were strongly opposed to a rev limit. Especially the Japanese manufacturers, that was one of the red lines that these new rules couldn't cross. So there was never going to be a way of doing it with a rev limit, but they've kind of found a way to do it without making a rev limit. Like without writing down a rev limit, they found a way to kind of create one by default. So it's sensible. It makes sense.
And we did need to do something to peg the bikes back a bit speed-wise now, didn't we, for the circuit's sake as much as anything?
Absolutely. I mean, if the bikes didn't get slower, then we were going to look at losing places like Jerez, like Mugello, like Sachsenring, because the bikes are just too fast for them. So there had to be a speed reduction if we wanted to keep those traditional circuits, because you can make circuits safer up to a point, but some of them are literally constrained by the geography of the places that they're in. You just can't do anything with it. So yeah, for me, this is a sensible approach.
Another change that I think, this will be probably the most popular change for fans, I reckon. Ride height devices are going altogether, which is not quite what we expected. I think that's going to be a welcome one. What do you think the riders will feel about that?
I'm a little bit surprised by it, I have to admit. Initially, we expected that the ride height devices mid-race would go, because that's been a big target of various manufacturers to get rid of over the past few years because of, it's been a target of the manufacturers to get rid of because some of them don't like them because they have no road bike relevance. It's also been a target of Dorna to get rid of them because it kind of makes racing too easy. It makes every corner exit basically flawless, and then that means it's really difficult to try and set up overtakes. So I understand why both of those parties wanted rid of them. What we did think would happen would be that the start devices would remain, because riders quite like those because they control wheelie off the line and make it a little bit safer. So we kind of presumed that they would stay, but they've been chopped as well, which I'm not losing any sleep over. I think that there are obviously safety implications to it, but it's maybe not as kind of hyped up as it's been made to be, especially with electronics doing some of that work as well.
They were such a clever idea, and I do get frustrated for designers and engineers when they come up with really game-changing things like that are brilliant ideas, but you just know almost technology for technology's sake. They weren't adding anything to the show. You could sort of see them in action, but they weren't great for the spectacle. They were just a very clever thing, and also when they went wrong, they were contributing to crashes, to bikes behaving in strange ways. So I won't miss them on those grounds. Aero, go on, Simon.
I think that the single biggest cause of mechanical problems we've had in races in the last 3 or 4 years has been ride height devices. 50% of the DNFs we've had in races has been because of them. So from that perspective, not going to miss them either.
Well, it's not just retirements, is it? It's like strange race performances is a bingo now. If either going to say it's a dud tyre, or are they going to say my ride height device was stuck on or not performing properly? So yeah, definitely see that. A lot of fans would have been delighted if the rules had come out and said all aero is binned, we'll go back to bikes with no wings. Obviously, we didn't expect that. Manufacturers didn't want that. It's not happening. But there are some new limits at least. Yeah,
they're dialing it back a little bit. I would still rather that it had been done by kind of downforce produced rather than frontal measurement. But they're lopping 10 centimeters off the width of the bikes. They're making them narrower. They're making them shorter with less of a nose. And I think the most important aero restriction for me is that the seat unit is now also going to become part of the homologated aero package. So you're only going to be allowed to bring essentially one rear wing update a season. which is, as we've seen the front wings kind of drift into a bit of a path. That's where we've seen all the really crazy stuff recently, and it's also where we've seen people bring in like new parts every weekend. So homologating that as well is it's a good way of restricting it. I think that they've dialed it back. We were never going to get rid of it, so they've dialed it back enough that I'm at least content that they've done something with it.
In terms of visual offensiveness, I think the rear seat unit wings have been getting even more obnoxious to look at than the front wings. I find some of the front wing designs clever, and I find the rear stuff clever as well. But it's just like that looks like you've taken some Lego to this bike. It's really, really ungainly. So fewer things to get knocked off wheel to wheel as well. It will be good as well. It does sound like that. This little trimming back will be a step in the right direction. So potentially with that and ride height devices, there are things here that will improve the quality of overtaking to a degree at least. We're not going to go back to it being as much of a free for all overtaking wise. Dirty air is still going to be a thing, but this feels like good compromise steps in the right direction. And it's not like the racing's processional now by any means, as Jerez proved. It's just not quite what it was.
It's going to make the bikes harder to ride, which is essentially a good thing because it means that rider skill comes to the fore more. So I think they've done enough that they'll be able to pass a bit easier. They've done enough that people will make more mistakes on corner exit and on corner entry and be able to get past there. So all in all, I think we're on the right path. It delivered everything I wanted it to, really.
And the other big change that struck me is the concessions reset. So we're fresh into a new concession system. It's not being binned, it's being paused as such. Everyone who's here right now gets moved back into the same band, which is band B, I think. So they all get a little bit of an allowance for 2027. And then the other provision is basically the BMW rule. It's not official that BMW is coming in yet, but it's very much expected. It's what we understand is happening. A manufacturer that did not race in 2026, which will be BMW, gets full band D concessions, gets the full chuck as much as you want at the bike within this allowance. So I like the sound of that. I like the fact it's a reset because I think the potential for someone currently struggling to almost sandbag for a couple of years and then get a lot of an allowance in the first year of the new rules was quite worrying, whereas now at least everyone's kind of in the same boat. But a new manufacturer gets a leg up, which worked so well for Aprilia and KTM, or KTM particularly when they were coming through. So what's your take on the concessions change?
Yeah, it needed to be rebalanced. I mean, that was a given because we're going to start from such a clean slate with these bikes. They are going to be so different. And I do not for 1 minute think that Honda and Yamaha are going to need concessions when it comes to building a brand new bike. I think that they should at least also start in a clean slate on a level playing field again. I mean, there's no guarantee that some of these manufacturers are going to still have the concessions that they have right now when it comes to the end of 2026 anyway, because we see Aprilia closing, we see KTM closing, and we do see Yamaha slowly starting to improve at the minute. So I think they're already not going to be where they are right now. I don't necessarily think it's only going to be Ducati who get demoted, as it were, from Band A by the point we get to, the time we get to this point. So yeah, it's sensible, it's sane, and incorporating in that BMW rule, as you've christened it, is something that we did at the start of the current concessions as well to allow new manufacturers a bit of an easier path in. That makes loads of sense. They're going to be at a disadvantage whenever things kick off without MotoGP experience. So yeah, I think that all makes a ton of sense. It's just sane really in the context of everything else.
I just realised as well that the wording is manufacturer didn't race in 2026, not new to MotoGP. So Suzuki, Kawasaki, you're welcome. You've got a little provision for you there if you fancy making it a real party. So
I would be very, very surprised.
It's too soon, isn't it? I'm just getting excited. What else caught your eye in the rules package, Simon?
So the only other thing that really stood out about it, there's a little bit of like housekeeping. We've reduced the amount of engines they're allowed by 1. We've reduced the amount of fuel per race by 2 litres. They've codified in the move to non-oil refinery product fuel, which is an interesting way of putting it, which basically means the synthetic fuel that we've been developing That's all kind of expected housekeeping, really, with the new regulations coming in. The one thing that really did catch my eye, though, is that there's a line that says that all GPS data will be released after the session from all teams to all teams. And I had a suspicion at the start as to why that was, and I went away and did some digging, and I'm glad that I got a bit of an answer to it, and I was right, as it turns out. So essentially, all of the teams right now use video analysis, where they have someone out on track with a camera who records all the bikes through a corner, and then you can come back in, overlay your rider's lines with other riders' lines, stuff like that. And essentially, the teams want the GPS data from the others, which is not super accurate GPS data, we should say. It's like 50 centimeter accuracy, I think they're hoping for. So it's not incredibly precise, but it's simply so that you can sync the video analysis stuff over with the with this GPS data to make sure that your video is talking about the right bike at the right time through the right corner, etc., which is sensible. It's kind of a sensible evolution in that. But the other part of it, it seems, is that data will then also be released not just to the teams but to the media.
Oh, lovely.
So whenever it comes to doing stuff like crash analysis, we're going to get a whole new way to do TV especially is going to get a whole new way to do crash analysis, because they can essentially recreate people's lines through corners to analyze what happened after incidents and stuff like that, which is something that Race Control already has, although they have it in less high resolution GPS because the new rules are going to move to a higher standard of it. So it's going to add a little bit to the spectacle of what we get to see at home as well, which is pretty cool.
Don't really want to wait till 2027 for that. Can they not just get this done for next week at Le Mans? That would be fine, because that's tasty.
I think it more might be convincing the manufacturers to let them do it rather than.
Yeah.
I wonder what concessions Dorna have had to leverage in order to get it off them.
Yeah, completely. Right, thank you for that, Simon. We'll let you get back on the road to Le Mans now. And listeners, we're going to have a lot more to talk about around the 2027 rules, and we've heard from more people in the paddock. We've got a couple of years to talk about them yet, so we'll make full use of that.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Listeners, you may have noticed a voice missing from that section. That's because Val Khorounzhiy has literally lost his voice, so he hasn't joined us for this part of the episode. But by a handy coincidence, when Val still could talk a few days ago, we did record something else. So in light of the 2027 rules being due out, plus thinking about Johan Zarco's incredible rant about stewarding at the Spanish Grand Prix, I tasked Simon and Val with coming up with the changes that we wanted to see in MotoGP, whether those changes were technical, sporting, marketing, or something else entirely. I gave them a completely open floor for this, which was a risky move, obviously. So the rest of this episode is all about those, what we would change about MotoGP, but we want to hear what you would change as well. So please send us your ideas in text or voice note form to podcasts@the-race.com or message us via our social media accounts @TheRaceMoto on X and Instagram, and we'll go through the best of those and give our views on them in a special episode in the gap between the French and Catalan Grand Prix. So, let's crack on. As is tradition, I've got the giant wooden dice to decide who goes first. Val, are you feeling odd or even today?
Oh, I'm feeling extremely odd.
I knew it. I'm not stunned. 5, which is an odd number. So, Val, you have first pick for something you would change about MotoGP.
Disclaimer, if my voice sounds weird, it's because I am not as healthy as I would normally like to be, but hopefully not too noticeable. And also, if I ramble more than usual, well, that's impossible anyway.
There will be a one-sentence element at some point, I'm sure, so I will enforce that.
My first one is sort of a drum that I've been banging for quite a while, and it's more of a philosophical thing than anything concrete, but it's I wrote it as more coverage of the full grid. Again, I'm ill, so I'm not entirely sure what I definitively meant by that, but what I partially meant by that, at least, is it feels like MotoGP race almost feels like its races are too short and too action-packed to really pay enough attention to the also competitive bikes and riders that aren't, I don't know if I'm saying the top 10, are outside the top 5, really. It feels like Yamaha and Honda, for instance, have completely disappeared from our screens this year because they can't sniff the top 10. But, you know, there's still stuff going on with them. There's still teammate battles there. There's still progress and regression, mostly regression right now. There's still a lot of interesting stuff going on. I know that obviously the winners and the big names and the Pecco Bagnais and the Jorge Martins and the Marc Marquezes are your bread and butter, and there's never going to be, you know, equal weight to those storylines. But again, somehow Formula One has pulled off this trick where people really do genuinely care about the midfield and the back markers, specifically the personalities there. And I think it's a vicious circle, because if you don't feel those things are worth covering because people aren't interested, well, they might not be interested because they're not seeing them, because they're not being covered, if that makes any sense.
So we've rated this a few times, and I was thinking, I agree, but is it just because, like, in our job, I'm watching a timing screen more than I'm watching the TV half the time, or we're discussing something on our Slack channel about how we're going to cover the race? Is it just I'm not paying enough attention, and these battles further down the championship are getting covered? So the last couple of races, I've actually tried much harder to go, right, look at what's on the screen, Matt, as well as what's on the timing screen. And you're absolutely right. When Pedro Acosta was down the field at Jerez, the TV direction was covering him out of Acosta-ness, basically. And I saw a bunch of bikes I feel like I haven't seen for the previous 3 races because they were where Acosta was, and the TV direction was rightly trying to see if he was going to come through the field. I've said before about how I always forget what colour the Repsol Honda now is because I feel like I haven't seen it on screen when it's been in one piece all season. And you guys have raised the point quite often that you'll go to rider debriefs and you'll hear them talk about collisions that you have no idea happened because that part of the field hasn't been on the TV screen. So I totally agree with this. I know the battles at the front are often brilliant. I know the personalities and the title battle are such that, you know, it's hard to turn your cameras away from the lead at times. But yeah, I feel this is a problem that MotoGP really should get on top of. Simon, what do you think?
So some very quick research there as Val was speaking. And the number one motorbike racer in the world right now is Jorge Martin, because he leads the World Championship. He has 848,000 followers on Instagram. The worst driver in Formula One right now, because he's at the back of the standings in Formula One, is Logan Sargent, and he has 885,000 Instagram followers. So the worst driver in F1 has 40,000 followers more than the best rider in MotoGP right now. And that is because these guys are just completely unknown. And it is absolutely an issue during the race. And, it is deeply frustrating to hear MotoGP talking about how many TV cameras they have on track, and then for something to happen during the race and you to go looking for it, and it doesn't exist. There is no record of rider X knocking rider Y off or something similar. And yeah, that is so frustrating, because sometimes as well, it's happening when these guys are so far away from the action at the front that you think, how is that camera that caught the leaders through that corner not swiveled back to catch the next guys through the corner? What's going on? And that actually comes into what's going to be my first point. But it's also an issue off the bike, because MotoGP, I think, tends to largely bury these guys on the broadcast coverage, full stop. And if you're a casual MotoGP fan at the minute, then you don't even know what Joan Mir looks like. And the guy's an ex-MotoGP world champion. He's a super personable guy. He's a character who's not afraid to open his mouth and say things about his rivals that theoretically would be controversial and quite interesting, and probably, with no ill will in the world, more interesting than anything that Logan Sargent's going to say about anyone in the F1 grid. But it doesn't happen because we don't get to see them. We don't build the characters. And as a result, yeah, it shows in the number of people caring about them and the number of people watching the sport. Joan Mir's manager told me a few years ago that to him the biggest failing of MotoGP was that he can walk down a street in Barcelona or Madrid next to Joan Mir and no one stops him to bother him. And I get it completely. That is a failing. Yeah. It's I don't know how you go about fixing it. I feel like a lot of what we're going to talk about in this recording is going to come back to things like content and marketing, and it's all tied up in it. But yeah, I think Val's right in that the number one way to fix it would be to show some of the action that these guys are having on track during the weekend, and then let them talk about it afterwards.
If Joan Mir was a Formula One driver, his charisma is such that there would already be infinite armies of his Twitter fans bashing Honda every weekend on Twitter, which isn't necessarily happening. Not that I'm saying it should happen, but that's what that's sort of the level of passion. Again, shouldn't happen, but that's the level of passion we're seeing in Formula One. The guy's personable, he's charismatic, he is both very, very smart, but also this sort of self-deprecating, very open about certain things. He really is, when people say modern MotoGP riders are boring, I think a lot of us, you can go person by person, but so much of it also has to do with you don't really hear from them about stuff that matters, about stuff that would interest you. Like some PR stuff, sure, that happens, but Joan Mir has been in the wars in many of the races to start the season. I think a couple, 2 or 3 of the races on Sunday, he's been riding around without wings on his bike because somebody's knocked him off. We've never seen any of those collisions. We don't really know who's at fault. We don't know what the disagreement was about. Those guys are pulling out awesome overtakes there, and they're disagreeing with each other. They're having feuds, all of that. We're not seeing any of that stuff. So what's even the point? It's not like it's a bunch of old CRT bikes that are 3 seconds off the road and don't matter and will never matter. It's not as if it's a bunch of gentleman riders aged 50 just banging into each other 20 seconds off the back. They are 20 seconds off the back, but you know what I mean. It's Honda and Yamaha with a bunch of really, really charismatic drivers. And I think only Fabio Quartararo has transcended even a little bit that part of the grid. And again, I'm not seeing that much of him either. I'm not seeing any of him. And those are not rinky-dink, tiny operations that won't matter. They are part of your future storytelling too. So yeah, that frustrates me a lot. And I imagine being Justin Marks in Trackhouse, right? You came into MotoGP, there's this underexploited sort of situation. But how many times have we seen a Trackhouse bike in race coverage? Ideally, I would go and count. But again, I'm ill. And also, even if I was healthy, let's pretend that's what's stopping me. It doesn't feel like a lot. I still don't have that Trackhouse livery seared into my brain. Sometimes I see it and think it's an LCR. Well, that says a lot about me, I guess, but it's not ideal.
LCR gets to a lot of liveries, Val.
This is true.
Yeah, sure.
I must try and find that data because it exists. All the teams get sent a report by an agency that Dorna employs that shows you how much TV time they get during all the sessions. So I must try and find it and get that answer.
Yeah.
And see what I mean, to go back to Joan Mir last weekend, Mir kind of strongly implied in Jerez that after contact with Marc Marquez, he very much went and told Marc Marquez what he thought of him, like to his face. That should be high drama. Yes. But we don't even, we don't know anything about it apart from what he told us, because obviously Marquez isn't going to talk about it, and Dorna didn't really cover it. And, Dorna, it's worth saying at this point, Dorna control essentially everything that you see that happens on track, regardless of who you're watching it with. Dorna control it because it all comes from their TV broadcaster, their studio. So unless your local TV network is going to dig out the replay of it if it exists, unless they're going to find Joan Mir and be like, hey, what did you say to Marc Marquez whenever you went and like threatened to punch him earlier? You just don't know about it apart from what you get from us. And as much as we try and do the job and tell these stories, the problem with us is that you don't get that same. It's hard to convey raw emotion in written interviews and and saying what someone said in writing. And you lose some of the passion for it. And as a result, you just get... People think MotoGP riders are boring, and I think the problem is that MotoGP storytelling is boring.
Yeah, I do not buy the MotoGP riders are boring argument at all. But partly because I think it's an argument that every generation makes at some point out of nostalgia.
Yeah.
We don't have a Valentino Rossi level character, but I can remember people saying how boring Casey Stoner was, and now he's just seen as a different personality who was more taciturn than Rossi, but was still getting in those spats with Rossi. You needed that balance. Danny Pedrosa, certainly compared to Rossi, Pedrosa was boring, but think about how much affection there is for Pedrosa when he's back on the grid with KTM now. Mm-hmm. The modern riders are boring argument is just nonsense. Pecco Bagnaia has a very low-key character, but within that he's a very thoughtful guy. He's a really interesting guy as well. Marc Marquez is capable of everything in the world still. Jorge Martin is a lunatic and talks like a lunatic sometimes as well. We have the characters, but that is not a problem. We don't have Rossi. That is all this is.
People think that Casey was boring, yet the single most iconic quote in MotoGP history was delivered by Casey Stoner when he asked Valentino if his ambition had outweighed his talent. Yeah. It is the MotoGP quote, and it came from the guy that everyone thinks is quite quiet and boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is the sort of, in race at least, there is part of the argument that I'm sympathetic to is they don't have the luxury to show so much, not the luxury so much, but there's not really that many dead spells, right? And I understand that. I appreciate that. Like Formula One can not only show, say, Kevin Magnussen overtake Logan Sargent or whatever, it can do it 15 times and sometimes has to.
It really
nothing
needs
else
to
is
most
going
of the time,
on and they have 2 hours to fill. Yeah. But that's the part where you invest a lot in screen, where you invest a lot in having in-race analysis of what happened as much as you can. Because otherwise, like, so much of the appeal is also, we watch those guys and we know that at some point in the future, basically all of them could win, right? We watched last year, Fabio Di Giannantonio turned from a guy who should not be on the grid to a guy who walked on water in Qatar. Just was perfect, was amazing. Anybody in MotoGP, everybody has the talent for that, basically. And there is a set of circumstances to where it happens to everybody. And if you have the viewers with the emotional connection to that person or some sort of knowledge of them beforehand, amazing, best storyline ever. Again, imagine if Logan Sargent wins a race tomorrow, wins the Miami Grand Prix. We'll lose our minds. It will be the greatest day in Formula One history, basically. Why wasn't Fabio Di Giannantonio's insane win the greatest day in MotoGP history? Why wasn't Johan Zarco's? Why is it all Mark and Pedro now? And that part, I think there's a missed opportunity there. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely approve this. Not so much rule change request, but priority change request. Yeah, totally get. You've got a lot going on in the battle for first place most of the time, and that's a fantastic thing for MotoGP and an absolute contrast to F1. But those stories do need telling. You've got the cameras on them. Like you guys say, work out the ways to make that happen, because the rest of the field deserves it, and it will all help the championship grow as well. There are passionate, crazy social media fan bases to get angry about things that aren't yet being tapped. Speaking of passionate social media fan bases and anger, Simon, what is your first thing you'd like to change about MotoGP?
I have to admit, whenever you pitched this podcast idea, I was like, oh, this is a great way for me to lose friends, influence people in all the wrong sorts of way, Matt. So my
I'm
first
not responsible for what comes out of your mouth. I just set the topic.
My first one, I debated throwing it out here, or whether or not we covered it enough, but I think it's separate enough. And it's an element of what we've just been talking about with Val, but it's specifically MotoGP's TV direction. I think that the standard of broadcast product that we produce isn't good enough anymore. And that's a bit of a tough thing to say, because some parts of it are really good. Like, some parts of it are really, really good. Let's not start by knocking them. Things like the onboard cameras are amazing. The technology that we use is amazing.
All 4 of them.
This is what we're coming to.
Yeah.
The weird innovations that they do, I don't always agree with, but I love the fact that they innovate by doing things like putting cameras in the rider's shoulder or putting cameras in the seat hump and things like that. It's all very cool. But first of all, it's crazy that, like Val says, you get 4 onboard cameras from the race. Whenever in F1, you get like 4 camera angles from every car to pick and choose from online. We should be able to do something like that. And the only reason that we don't, let's be honest, is investment. It's because Dorna don't want to pay for it. It is entirely doable. And you know what? It would go a long way to solving everything we've talked about in one fell swoop if they just broadcast from all 22 bikes, because then you'd see all those clashes.
Yeah.
And they'd be able to make highlights reels from all those clashes. You'd be able to dig out pieces from all those. You'd be able to stitch together so much more stories after the event, even if it's after the event, and tell interesting things. It would be brilliant, but we don't do it. And I don't know why, apart from the fact that it costs money. There's also an element of the camera work tending to just spectacularly shoot off in the opposite direction whenever something interesting's happening. I think we saw it on Sunday in Jerez. We watched Pecco Bagnaia cruising around basically like half a second, 3/4 of a second clear, and the final lap after he'd broken Marc Marquez, and we missed the really good battle for... No, sorry, I apologize. It was the sprint race, and we missed the battle between... we were watching Martin, and we missed the battle between Pedrosa and Quartararo for the podium, because we just got Martin an empty track. And like, that is... There's a fixation on showing the winner, the leader, that I think they need to get over. We've started getting better at it with a bit of picture-in-picture, but not properly, not the way that other sports do it. Much to my absolute great shame, and almost entirely thanks to Justin Marks and Trackhouse, I now find myself the person who watches NASCAR. And NASCAR are really good at doing picture-in-picture.
Yes, that's
like
true.
It works really well there. They are very, very good at 2 big windows on screen at the same time.
All the time.
That shows the guy at the front and something else.
Yeah.
Be it a replay, be it the guys, be it a race leader trying to come through the pack further back, or a race winner.
Yeah.
They're really, really good at it. And MotoGP should be better at it, because there's no excuse not to in this day and age. It's there for the taking. And then finally, this is an old complaint, and thankfully one that we've not really experienced this year, but there remains a fixation in MotoGP TV direction with showing injury, and in some cases even death, that I think they need to lose if they want to become a properly international sport. I once sat in the media center in Mugello and watched a 19-year-old kid unsuccessfully get CPR in the middle of the track for 45 minutes. And I don't need to see that. No one in this world needs to see that. They replayed Jason Dupasquier's crash on screen. The clip went viral to the extent that his little brother had to go on social media and said, "Please stop sharing the video of my brother being killed." And that's on MotoGP, because that replay should never have been aired. That should never have went out, because their TV direction is too sure in its own belief that a rider is absolutely fine after they've had a crash. And that's one example, but there's a dozen others that I can roll off. There's, even recently there's Paul Espargaro's crash at Portimao, where you could see a medic hanging a bag of blood over him as they pumped it into him. There was Jorge Navarro sitting trackside at Phillip Island, bleeding to death from internal bleeding, and they showed it over and over. There's too much of it, and that's something that just needs to stop.
Right, Val, although on my screen it looks like Val has keeled over from his illness. No, he's back now.
No.
Val, what is your second way to improve MotoGP?
Yeah, again, that's another note that I'm trying to make sense of in real time. It says, just make it Q0. And I'm going to elaborate on what I'm trying to say by that. So, MotoGP riders all hate the way Friday is structured right now. Because, they get the 45 minutes to start things off. They get the hour-long second practice, but of that hour in second practice, the last 30 minutes are all qualifying, basically, are all qualifying push laps, which is good. Like, that's a way in which MotoGP is tangibly better than Formula One, because you have a reason to watch Friday, which otherwise I do not feel is the case. But 30 minutes of Q0, informal Q0, that is a little too much. And to give riders and teams a bit more freedom, the way I would do it is I would have the first practice session, I would have the second practice session, and then I would designate a very small amount of time at the end of that second practice session to make your qualifying situation, basically. And you can keep it the same format, but just don't make it 30 minutes. 30 minutes is too much for an initial qualifying phase on Friday. Let them get their extra track time, then send them out there for 10, maybe 5 minutes. Maybe even spread out a little bit so there's not insane towing going on and total madness. I don't know how I would do it, because then you have the threat of yellow flags just absolutely ruining laps and sessions. But curtailing that a little bit also will create a little bit more jeopardy to where you'll have Q1 be even more hotly contested than it is right now. It's good right now, but I think it can be better through allowing worse teams to capitalize on Friday by having less of an opportunity on Friday, if that makes any sense. Basically, it's such a minute thing, but I would segment it a bit more.
I still don't think Friday works at the moment, does it? It feels like there is still... the balance of pointless versus stressful is still a little bit off kilter. I prefer sessions that mean something as a viewer generally, and I think, again, let's throw another Formula One comparison. Formula One has got bolder about having fewer sessions that are irrelevant. Its structure changes around sprints and stuff have done away with what I used to call FP pointless on a Saturday morning of a sprint. Of a sprint weekend. Everything kind of weighs a lot more now, and F1 can now have a 45-minute practice session and then go, right, that's your pointless bit done. Everything else now means something and sets a grid or scores points. I know MotoGP riders are generally keen to have a bit more time that is less pressure, and I get that from a safety and preparation point of view for them. But yeah, I think I agree that the timetable is not... It's not quite there still, is it? And you feel this would make things more mixed up under your system anyway as well, Val?
Yes, because I think the way it is right now, you have that jeopardy, but then usually you give the very best a really good chance in Q1 anyway, because if you're like proper, then you'll make it through, usually. There is a chance of getting trapped, but like if Pecco Bagnaia gets trapped on Friday, you don't really feel he's at risk so much most of the time. Which isn't necessarily a problem, meritocratically, all that. But if you're going to have a sort of this two-tiered qualifying system of Friday segment-ish, then there's like a second chance saloon Q1 and then Q2, well, you might as well make it more difficult, I guess, because otherwise you could just form Q2 out of the Friday practice stuff and then not have Q1 and just set the rest of the grid on FP2. I mean, there's a bit of redundancy there, I would say. But it's better than the alternative, which is just not do any of it and run full grid Q1. But then I think that makes Friday really boring. I know riders don't like it, and I'm trying to think of how I would improve it for them without making Friday bad.
There's a solution to this, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. I'm not proposing pitching to be the guy that knows what it is. I get what you're saying, Val. But I think the problem is that the current format has turned Friday's Q0 thing into something interesting. And there has to be a solution that still lets you do that in some way or another. For me, I would keep Friday. I would keep it the way it is right now, but I'd spin off the last 15 minutes of the Friday afternoon practice into a separate qualifying section.
Yeah, that is basically, that would, I think 15 maybe isn't quite the number I was going for, but that is basically
just spin that off, have a full grid qualifying section at that point that decides who goes to Q1 and Q2.
Yeah.
And then that you've still got something dramatic. And if anything, it's an easier sell because you've got a 15-minute qualifying package.
That's true.
That you can deliver, that you can sell to broadcasters, sell to fans. You don't have to tune in to watch the full hour and 45 minutes of Friday's action. You just watch 15 minutes. And it's explosive and it's good and it's entertaining. Problem solved.
Yeah, I'd go with that. That is quite a neat solution. And I think as well at the moment, the way Friday is built is quite a hard sell because it doesn't come across to the outside as significant as it generally is in terms of setting the Q1 to Q2 cutoff. It's sort of hidden within a practice day. It's stressful for the riders and teams, and there's quite a lot to talk about for the media, but for a casual viewer, you wouldn't tune in for practice. You don't realise it's actually going to go anywhere.
You hear from multiple MotoGP riders over and over again that Friday is the most important day of the weekend.
Yeah.
Sometimes by a pretty hefty margin. Like, you hear guys like Raul Fernandez talk about how it's like his biggest problem is, he's not up to pace on Friday, and by the time he's feeling more competitive, the weekend's already compromised. It's too late. Somebody got left behind and can't, and it blocks him off of progressing out of Q1, basically. And that's good. Because you want every part of the weekend to matter. You don't just want a full day of rehearsal for me. And so I do like the way they're doing that. I just think there was a feeling, and I think it still is there, that it's maybe a little bit too much pressure the way it is right now. And like just 30 minutes of qualifying on Friday just feels, I don't know, it's tough. Sounds difficult.
Simon, have you got as easy a fix for your next point as the one you just fixed for Val?
Yeah, 100%. But it's not going to be a popular one.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, wow.
Everyone will be surprised that it's taken me until my second roll of the dice to come to MotoGP stewarding.
Right.
But we're at MotoGP stewarding because that is obviously something that needs to be fixed. What's painful right now is that I thought it was fixed. I thought that we got to at least a better place and showing some sensible moves towards, policing the sport in a more sensible and a more consistent way. And then that all went out the window in Jerez whenever the stewards just made some really, really, really unusual decisions. And I should say none of this is flavoured or coloured in any way by Johan Zarco's spectacular rant against Freddie Spencer, because all he did was kind of confirm something that I was already thinking. But the reality is that we've been saying this for so long. MotoGP stewarding needs to be consistent. It needs to bring the same penalties to similar offences week in, week out, with no room for personal feeling or interpretation or bias or anything like that. And at the minute it doesn't do that, because so Zarco, I feel, I'm glad that Zarco gave the rant that he did in Jerez, because really what it did was it gave us an opportunity to talk about something that we've not really talked about before, because it's something that we've heard about, but you hear stories and you don't want to report them as fact because you've not heard it. And this whole thing where Freddie Spencer and the stewards under him kind of look to the riders for direction when it comes to penalising other riders, that is something we've heard of a lot in the past. That's a fairly consistent complaint. And that's just not good enough, because there are some guys who will shrug their shoulders and say, well, do whatever you want. And then there's some guys like Jack Miller who'd rather just go outside and punch the other guy a few times than have him get a penalty. And then there's the people like Aleix Espargaro who will, moan about a move that, let's be honest, the week before he'd have done on someone, and will apparently see harsher penalties coming because of it. And no World Championship sport should be like that. I get that it's hard to be the referee, but I also think that the fact that you are a referee means that you need to come into it properly trained and ready to deal with the situations that are thrown your way. You also need to be better at communication, which comes back to the other big issue where we don't understand what the stewards do, because the stewards don't tell us anything about their decision making. And it briefly looked like they'd improved on that at the end of last year, with a bit more we were getting press releases with notes in them explaining what they'd done. And then we saw on Saturday, Brad Binder knock off Pecco Bagnaia, essentially get away completely scot-free, and no one really understands why, because everyone that looked at it said, that's not fair, that's not right. And yeah, I wish we weren't talking about stewarding again. I thought we got past it, but apparently not.
I mean, obviously the thing with consistency is every single championship in the world demands one from its stewards, apart from the championships where the stewards don't really exist as a meaningful going concern, like NASCAR, for instance. I don't know nothing about NASCAR stewards because NASCAR would rather that its drivers go ahead and punch each other in the outfield, which I probably would not want to see for MotoGP, even though it might be entertaining for one round. It's as I think we've spoken before, but we're still sort of in that situation. It is a question of formalizing things, right?
Yeah.
For instance, remember the Jack Franco Morbidelli collision last weekend, which didn't show up on the investigations sheet, did it?
I think it showed on the investigation sheet, but the aftermath didn't.
The aftermath didn't, even though we know that Miller got told off for it.
Yeah.
It just, all of that just sort of sounds like riders get called up on a whim, just, to hash it out in person, to find some sort of solution that's agreeable to everybody. It's all very laissez-faire. Like, just live and let live and try to not really establish your authority so much. Which is why riders are openly disrespectful to the stewarding panel every single time when talking to the media and have no fear whatsoever of any retribution in terms of fines. Like, you talk about Michelin, you might be in trouble. You say absolutely anything about the stewards. Like, you could say like some of the worst things you could say about a human being about the stewards, and
Jack Miller has.
Yeah, Jack Miller has. Yeah. So that's sort of the weird part. They have to be, I don't want to say more draconian, because I don't want to say more consistent, because that's, for me, that's, everybody wants that from everybody, and that's obviously the platonic ideal of what everything is striving for. But certainly more formalized and more authoritative and more, not pally-pally with the riders, not trying to find some sort of common ground consensus. Make a decision, stick with it, don't get yourself talked out of it or whatever. See the evidence, invite the riders and their teams and a team representative who should be there with a background in arguing that sort of thing. Formula One stewards investigations, they could be better, certainly, but you can tell that it's a level of seriousness above what happens in MotoGP. And in MotoGP, banging into each other is worse. That gets people injured. So let us take it a little bit more seriously than we do right now.
The other thing, and this kind of goes back to the TV direction and the show and the further down the field conversation, is that it also seems to be that what gets studied by the stewards is largely dependent on what gets shown on TV.
Yes.
And that shouldn't be the case, because they have access to so much more information and screens and data and everything than the person watching the broadcast feed does. I mean, the common parlance now among basically everyone on the grid who's raced there is that from sort of 8th to the back of the grid is now known as the jungle, because it's just so aggressive, especially in the first laps. People bang into each other. Someone loses a wing every weekend. There is constant contact. It's not all in lap one. It happens through the early part of the race, but we don't see it. The stewards don't investigate it, and nothing ever comes from it, because it's not in their window of attention. Even the Miller Morbidelli thing at Jerez, we saw Morbidelli crash and take Miller with him, and we saw that investigated. We only saw what happened in the gravel trap later, where Miller essentially headbutted him, which under previous, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but under previous disciplinaries, that should have been a serious sanction for Miller, and he got away with it. And I think it's because it wasn't shown during the race. That is part of this inconsistency thing that's not good enough. Basically, if you want to be a super aggressive rider, do it in 12th. No one will ever notice.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we've. I can't confirm this, but I think we've absolutely seen incidents where you only sort of see the end of it and the bike crashing. And I don't know that they have the resources to figure out what actually happened there, apart from listening to the sides in question.
I agree with where you're coming from with this, and I've found the Zarco comments and many other riders amusing and easy to understand. Zarco talked about that needing the Riders Association to happen so that they can choose different officials. I'm a little bit confused why it hasn't happened yet, given it was last October, everything seemed to be coming together, Sylvain Gintoli picked to lead it, and we're a long way on from that now. But also, when it does, is it going to have enough influence that it could do something like push through a change of stewards? Because I really cannot see that. And also, on top of that, even with a really open stewarding system that explained every decision, used every camera angle, was very kind of objectively fair and had clear guidelines that it publicised, are riders actually going to be happy, or will they still be arguing subjective cases? So there's sort of three questions in one for you there, Simon. Where's the rider union? Will it actually have any influence? Would riders be happy with stewarding at any point anyway?
The problem with the Riders' Union is that essentially no one wants it to happen apart from about 3/4 of the riders on the grid. Dorna have made it expressly clear in the past, up to and including like shouting at me during a press conference, that no one wanted it to happen, which is clearly untrue. I've been accused by Carmelo Ezpeleta as being the person responsible for it, which vastly overestimates my influence on anyone. I don't have that influence over my own dog, let alone over the MotoGP grid. So that is not the case. There are some people that really want it to happen. There are some people that don't really care either way, and then there's quite a few others within the hierarchy of the series who are actively working to make it not happen. And I think that as a result, it's proving to be quite difficult to get it over the line at the minute, because we basically heard a small flurry of talking about it 6 months ago and then nothing since, which also suggests that whenever it is in place, just how much influence and impact it's actually going to have is probably going to be relatively minor, because as for the riders are never happy. That's a universal truth, that no rider is ever happy with anything. And as a result, it doesn't really matter to me whether or not they're happy, because at the end of the day, they are part of a bigger sport. They're part of a bigger organization. And at the end of the day, it's not about whether or not riders are happy. Essentially, it's about whether fans at home are happy and whether they're watching. And the riders forget that quite a bit of the time in MotoGP across many things. Engineers also forget it, which is why aerodynamics exist and ride-height devices exist. So it's not unique to the riders, but I don't think they're necessarily the people that this is a case for. This isn't like, they're not the target audience that this is playing for, because people want to see consistency. People at home seem to want to see consistency.
Okay, we've done the way MotoGP markets its midfield, we've done TV direction, we've done Friday formats, we've done stewarding. So I reckon whatever's coming next from Val might be quite left field, because I feel like the ones I thought you guys would rant about have happened already. So where is Val coming from for his final pick? Oh, a big sigh. That was an interesting start.
Yeah, because I just realized already my second point was pretty minute, like a minor tweak, and everything else I have in me is also so minor, so annoyingly minor key and low grade, and so, but why not, right? Because I think that shows that for everything that we do say, the championship is in brilliant shape. It's in really, really good shape. It's, how would I put it? Because the problem is I'm not smart enough to solve this.
This is
right?
an incredible preamble, and I have no idea what is going to come at the end of the sentence, so I'm intrigued now.
The risk freaks me out, right? I still haven't resolved this in my head, and I don't feel like enough steps have been taken to account for the fact that we now have 40 starts a season instead of 20, or whatever, 44 instead of 22, whatever. And that, last year we had a remarkably injury-laden season, and so far we're avoiding it. But I don't believe that's I think that's just variance, and we know that there are more injury-creating situations under the new format, and because of the bikes are all so good now, there is gonna be a moment every single weekend, basically, in one of the two races, where your heart goes in your mouth because something scary adjacent has happened during the race. And sometimes it's things that we can't really fix, sometimes it's things that we can, but I just like more focus on that before somebody gets really, really hurt, if that makes any sense. I know they're working on stuff. They're doing wasn't there a test of radio comm again this past weekend? There's, they've been working on the alert system this whole time, and ultimately there's only so much you can do. I know that. Like, for instance, the insane Moto3 crash that we saw this past weekend, where a rider fell off his bike, but the bike continued to ride and took basically went across the track right in front of Matteo Ferrari, I believe it was. There's nothing you can do, but if Matteo Ferrari hit that bike, it would be the worst crash of the season by a pretty comfortable margin. I feel it would be not something that any of us want to see. I would like to see more thoughts and more energy in trying to figure out how do we prevent riders from running bunched up as much as they do during weekends, even apart from races. Like, let's have fewer of them follow each other for qualifying laps, because that's also always a recipe. If somebody falls and a bunch of other people are following him, you create a situation where you're asking for that person to be hit. And if every session of the weekend is now like that, if it's you go for the 30 minutes in FP2 again, and what do those 30 minutes look like? They look like 6-7 bike snakes, going across the track. Maybe it's fine. We've avoided anything too serious so far, but look, it's bike racing. Obviously, it's not going to be super safe. People are going to break bones. People, unfortunately, die. That's probably not something we can fix anytime soon, but I don't know. Just maybe me being panicky because this season doesn't support it so far as a theory, but I wouldn't be worth much if that changed my view on it. I'd like more. And
this is a tough one because I think risk is inherent in motorcycle racing, and it always will be to some extent, to some way or another, because of the nature of what we do and what these guys are doing. I absolutely get that doesn't mean that we should never stop pushing for safety. Like, we should always be striving. We can never be safe, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't always be trying to be safer. Always. Like, every decision that the championship makes should in some way be considering that, because it has to. And for me, the fundamental problem with MotoGP and risk is that it's still too reactive. We're still too often doing things after something bad has happened, and that mentality needs to change. We need to get into a position where it becomes a lot more proactive, where things are considered in advance, where safety is something that is taken into consideration before every decision is made, regardless of what that decision is. Should we? There's so much of it. Like, it's a case of considering the safety implications of putting the riders on a bus around the circuit for an hour on a morning before the race, because does that mean that they're missing, X, Y, or Z? Does it mean that they're going into the race less prepared? As an example, every change that we make should be analysed from that safety point of view, just to make sure that it isn't going to make things worse. But there also needs to be a case of looking at some of the things that we already do, and looking at some of the circuits we go to, looking at the tracks that we go to. Everything should be under constant scrutiny, basically.
Yeah.
That just, we should always be looking at everything all the time. And right now, I have little faith in the championship for doing that. I mean, The reality is, whenever the safety officer is the family of the people that run the championship, I don't care how talented he is or how perfect for the job he is, it's still very serious. It's very, very difficult to take them seriously whenever it feels like nepotism plays a role in safety, because there's no place for that. So yeah, there's a lot more to be done there, and it's cultural and attitude more than anything else.
Yeah, I think so too. And again, there will be people who, and they won't necessarily be wrong, who'll say, look, we're on a good run. Nobody's really been hurt massively this season. There's been nothing to the same level of scares that we had last year. Like, no moment, thank goodness, at all reminiscent of, Pecco Bagnaya's leg being crunched in Barcelona or anything to that, or obviously Paul's horrible crash. But obviously always the counter to that is, well, when it does happen, let's hope it does not, but if it does, well, then the question will be, why wasn't something done to prevent whatever specifically happened in this case? And a lot of the times, riders go to a track and they get asked about safety, and they'll have active ongoing concerns that they will sometimes feel just haven't been addressed and won't be, and they don't feel like really forcing their case on. And they're not soft people, whatever that means, right? Those guys have all broken more bones than you or I know bones, right? Like, they are not strangers to pain. They are not strangers to risk. They are not... In fact, a lot of them probably would not want the inherent risk of death gone from motorcycle racing. I think New Order Liberty Media would quite like that risk of death to go, because I think there should be a bit of envy to sports like the NBA, where you have a pretty good feeling that everybody who started the match will make it to the end in terms of, having a pulse. But, when those guys are worried about some things, they're worried about how much the bikes are speeding up, they're worried about how close some of the walls are sometimes. I mean, even at Jerez, we saw a crash that could have been quite bad, right? It was it Pedro Acosta Sunday morning warm-up?
Yeah.
He goes off at speed.
High speed.
Bike hits the tire wall. He hits the tire wall. Bike gets, all the speed from the bike gets scrubbed off, which is good, but it does get picked up into the air. The angle is slightly different. I mean, yeah, if he ends up under that bike, obviously season ender probably, or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, maybe he doesn't. Maybe that's not how that crash could ever work. Maybe they've looked into it. But I don't know. Because some of the riders are often worried about the speed and the track conditions and stuff like that, and because it doesn't feel like we hear that much about things that are being done on more than a track-specific level. I don't know. That's just, it's not really, none of this has been a cohesive suggestion for me, apart from more of a focus, please.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Ultimately, we talk about people being sat on motorbikes, not attached to motorbikes. Motorbikes go extremely fast.
Yes.
I cannot conceive of a way in which technology or rules allow us to take away the possibility of someone landing so heavily off that bike, hitting a wall when they come off that bike, or being hit by another bike in a way that would do them very serious, potentially fatal harm. I don't know how you get away from that in motorbike racing at all. But I think, as you guys have both said, it comes down to, well, what can we minimize? Where are the wins that we can get, and just making sure that, hopefully that is still going on in a more intense way in the background than it sometimes feels like it is in the foreground, and things won't turn out to be reactive. That's what you got to hope. But there shouldn't be any kind of time wasted or any idea wasted on that front. The sprint thing is tricky because, like you say, it has doubled the number of starts. Starts are inherently risky. My slight niggle with saying that the introduction of sprints is a fundamentally unsafe thing is like, well, okay, I know you've increased it by 100%. But at the same time, if you're saying 40 starts a year are dangerous, 20 is still an awful lot of dangerous ones to be happening in the first place. So it comes down to a really fundamental thing of, should we do this at all? But I do also get the point that you're increasing that risk, doubling it by having twice the number of races. But then you could say the same about calendar expansion to a degree. It's just, it's philosophically, it's tricky. Simon, is your last one as philosophically tricky as this? No,
it's not. And it's really random and niche. And there might be a bit of recency bias in it because it kind of specifically stems from last weekend's Spanish Grand Prix. But MotoGP needs to use their riders better before the event to sell the event, instead of doing really niche and random pre-events that are not of any interest. So this is an old complaint of mine, but what it stems from specifically is last Thursday before the Spanish Grand Prix, Val, correct me if I'm wrong here, there was a Seville derby, which is like an hour away from Jerez, and they went to, Marc Marquez and Alex Marquez went to a training camp with Real Betis.
Yes.
And basically kicked the football around for a few hours behind closed doors with a few Dorna cameras. they all get their chance to take selfies with the football players because they're all football fans. And then they went to Jerez, where Marc Marquez arrived so late that he wasn't able to attend the press conference. And the only thing that I think that MotoGP achieved from that event was the ability for a few people to get selfies with footballers. It did absolutely nothing to grow the sport. It did nothing to engage fans. It did nothing. It achieved absolutely nothing for MotoGP. And that's a fairly standard thing. We've seen all sorts of these pre-events before. The most obvious one I can think of a few years ago is British Grand Prix, where Mark and Alex Marquez went to Man City and did a training camp with them.
With Pep.
Again, behind closed doors. No one got to see anything. No one could turn up to see them or get autographs signed. And it just seems really wasteful. It seems like a really bad use of these guys' time, because it wasn't always like this. And I remember Marc Marquez doing a pre-event for the British Grand Prix where he rode across the Millennium Bridge outside St. Paul's Cathedral in the middle of central London one morning. And it was huge because everyone was talking about the fact that there was a MotoGP bike riding across a metal catwalk pedestrian bridge, by the way, in the rain, which brave. But it was loud and it was visual and it was in the centre of London and it had spectacular visuals and it had all these people here to see it. And I just think, why don't we do things like that anymore? Why don't we, if we're struggling to attract new people to MotoGP, why are we not bringing MotoGP to the people? Why are we not putting these guys and motorbikes front and center? I back in the day before I worked in MotoGP, I worked in British Superbikes, and British Superbikes, among their number of ridiculous pre-events that they did, they always seemed to do the best ones in Scotland whenever BSB went to Knockhill. One involved closing the Forth Road Bridge and rolling a convoy of BSB bikes across the Forth Road Bridge with fans at the other end to receive them, which was spectacular. The other was closing off St. George's Square in the centre of Glasgow to do skids and wheelies for an hour. And things like that suck people in. They engage fans. And I just think if you're going to use MotoGP riders' time, we might as well use it better to get to the people that don't currently watch the sport instead of Spanish footballers.
Yeah, 100%. So Marquez being too late to get to a Thursday press conference at the track, actually don't care about that whatsoever. I think Thursday media days are a relatively hard sell for the media, let alone for fan interest, unless you're doing something really fan-centric at the track.
Well, the thing, just for me, the difference there is that it was the Spanish Grand Prix and it was the first chance that a lot of Spanish media who don't cover MotoGP had to speak to Marc Marquez since Valencia last year.
Okay, that's
so for selling it to a regional audience, which should be done at every race, that was important.
Yeah, okay, you can. Yeah, I'll go with that definitely. I think when it's just like, to be honest, for us,
I didn't care.
We can live without that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do see that
exactly.
point.
Yeah,
But I totally agree with the other point. Don't do stuff behind closed doors. Thrust those bikes in front of the public wherever you can, because this is a championship that deserves more fans. So give it every chance to get that. And a few footballers who are unlikely to be free to watch MotoGP because they're playing football on Sunday afternoons anyway for the massive professional clubs, they're not the target audience.
I mean, the pre-event in Texas, for example, was I think a meet and greet with the rather politically he's not everyone's cup of tea, the governor of Texas.
Greg Abbott?
The meeting, the event was the Trackhouse riders meeting him for a photo opportunity in front of the state capitol, to which he didn't show up, I should add. But why not do the pre-event on the Saturday or on the Sunday before and take two Trackhouse MotoGP bikes and do a lap of a NASCAR speedway alongside, things like that.
Yeah. Bring
the sport, bring these awesome sounding, weird looking, incredibly fast bikes to people instead of just, It's a really niche point, but it's one that's in my head at the minute.
Oh, I don't think that is niche. I think that is fun. That sort of thing is fundamental to what MotoGP needs.
I think a lot of people will resonate with that because, look, I like the Betis player they meant, Joaquin.
You were the only person excited by it, Val.
Yeah. No, good player. What can I do? But you don't want it, you want it to feel for the people, right? You want to feel part of it. You don't want to feel like they're just traveling around the world seeing
Spanish footballers.
scores of Spanish
scores of
footballers,
Spanish football. Because it's weird how many of our pre-events in so many countries involve Spanish footballers.
I mean, again, the Man City thing was with Pep Guardiola, the Catalan manager.
Yeah. And the
City.
Qatar pre-event multiple times have been with the head of the Qatar Football Academy, who's ex-Barcelona player Xavi.
There's a theme.
There's a
Who is now the manager of Barcelona, by the way? In case
I know, but these were long before. Yeah.
But yeah, no, football players or just rich people, politicians, stuff like that, corporations, whatever. I mean, that's not, you're gonna fulfill your sponsorship obligations doing that, but are you gonna future-proof yourself in terms of the audience you get? Are you gonna bring yourself to the people?
No, not at all.
I don't know. No. Yeah.
Okay. So I like the fact that most of our suggestions have all been actually about MotoGP's appeal, about excitement, about fan engagement. Even the stewarding point comes down to not what the riders want. It's like, let's make it understandable so people can guess if something's a penalty or not, can see the instance, can know it's fair. So I think we've done some good public service suggesting there with MotoGP's interests at heart, rather than getting, even though you guys suggested some things you think are niche, I don't think they are at all. I think this is all about, we love MotoGP. We want more people to love MotoGP because there's so much to love about it at the moment. So listeners, your chance to get involved. You can slate or agree with our ideas, but more importantly, please send your own. What would you change about MotoGP in terms of format, rules, stuff about the marketing and presentation? The floor is completely yours. Send your voice notes or emails to podcasts@the-race.com or message us via our social media platforms at The Race Moto on X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. We'll get round to all of those, like we said, in the week between Le Mans and Barcelona, but next time we'll be in your ears. It'll be fresh from the French Grand Prix, so we'll speak to you then.
The Athletic.